lemon. An ominous, unidentifiable lump continuously weighed down on my heart. Whether it was anxiety or disgust, I couldn't tell. It was as if the hangover that comes after drinking was now a constant. When you drink every day, a time comes when you experience something like a perpetual hangover. That time had come. This was not a minor issue. It was not the result of pulmonary tuberculosis or nervous exhaustion. It was not because of backbreaking debts. What was wrong was that ominous lump. The beautiful music that had once pleased me, the verses of poetry I once loved, had become unbearable. Even when I went out of my way to listen to a phonograph, after 2 or 3 bars, I would suddenly feel the urge to get up and leave. Something made it impossible for me to stay still. And so, I wandered from city to city, aimlessly, day after day. For some reason, during that time, I remember being strongly attracted to things that were shabby yet beautiful. I liked landscapes of crumbling cities or backstreets, places that were familiar rather than formal, streets where dirty laundry was hung, clutter was scattered, or filthy rooms could be seen through open doors. I liked cities that had a kind of charm, where the elements of nature had eroded and were eventually returning to the earth, places where earthen walls were crumbling, and houses leaned precariously, only the plants seemed to thrive, and sometimes there would be an unexpected sunflower or blooming canna. Sometimes, as I walked through such streets, I would suddenly try to convince myself that I was not in Kyoto, but in a city hundreds of miles away, like Sendai or Nagasaki. I tried to create the illusion that I had arrived in a city where no one knew me. Above all, I longed for rest. A quiet room in a deserted inn, a clean futon, a mosquito net with a pleasant scent, and a well-pressed yukata. I wanted to lie down for a month without thinking about anything. My greatest wish was that, before I knew it, I would find myself in that city. Once the illusion started to succeed, I would continue to paint it with my imagination. It was nothing more than a double image of my illusion and the crumbling city. I took pleasure in losing myself in it, forgetting my own reality. I also began to like fireworks. Fireworks themselves were secondary, but the cheap-colored ones in red, purple, yellow, and blue, the bundles with various striped patterns, the fireworks of Nakayama Temple, the Battle of Flowers, and the withered pampas grass. Then there were the mouse fireworks, which were each a small ring packed into a box. These things strangely stirred my heart. I also began to like marbles made of colored glass, like Bidoro, blown glass, that had been shaped into designs of sea bream or flowers. I also grew fond of Nankandama, the small, colorful marbles. Sucking on them became an indescribable pleasure for me. What other taste could be as faint and cool as the taste of that Bidoro? When I was a child, I often put them in my mouth and got scolded by my parents. Perhaps it is because that sweet memory of my childhood reappeared, now that I had grown up and become so jaded. That taste, indeed, carries a faint, refreshing flavor, something almost poetic, a taste that lingers. As you might have guessed, I had no money at all. However, even seeing such things and feeling the slightest stir in my heart required some form of indulgence. Things that cost 2 or 3 sen, what I considered luxuries. Beautiful things, things that seemed to flatter my languid, detached senses. Such things naturally comforted me. Before life had completely worn me down, I used to love places like Maruzen. The red and yellow eau de cologne, the elegant cut glasswork, the amber and jade-colored perfume bottles with Rococo-style floating patterns. Pipes, small knives, soap, tobacco. I would spend an hour or so just looking at these things. In the end, I would indulge in a luxury like buying a fine pencil. But even this place, by that time, had become nothing more than a burdensome location for me. Books, students, the cash register, everything seemed to me like the ghost of a debt collector. One morning, at that time, I was moving from one friend's boarding house to another, from friend A to friend B, living in a transient manner. I found myself left alone in the emptiness of the room after my friend had gone to school. Once again, I had to set out wandering. Something pushed me forward. And so, I wandered from one street to another, walking through the back alleys I mentioned earlier, stopping in front of a candy shop, gazing at the dried shrimp, dried cod, and yuba at the dried goods store. Eventually, I made my way down Teramachi toward the Nijo area, where I stopped at a fruit shop. I would like to introduce this fruit shop a little. It was the shop I liked most within my limited experience. It was by no means a grand store, but the unique beauty of the fruit shop was most apparent here. The fruit was arranged on a steeply slanted stand, which I believe was an old black lacquered board. The fruit seemed to be arranged as though a fast-paced, beautiful piece of music, like a brisk allegro, had been turned into a still image, as if the viewer had been struck by a Gorgon's face that turned them to stone. The colors and volume of the fruit were frozen in this way. The vegetables, too, were piled higher and higher as you moved further back. The beauty of the carrot tops was truly magnificent. Then there were the beans soaking in water and the koi, water chestnut, as well. The beauty of that house was especially evident at night. Teramachi Street was generally a lively thoroughfare, and though it was livelier than places like Tokyo or Osaka, there was still a certain clarity to it. The light from the display windows poured out onto the street in great abundance. However, for some reason, only the area around that particular shop seemed unusually dark. This was probably due to the fact that one side of the shop faced the dark Nijo Street, which made it naturally dark. But it was strange that the neighboring houses along Teramachi Street also seemed dark. Had that house not been dark, I don't think it would have tempted me so much. Another factor was the canopy that extended over the shop. The canopy, like the brim of a deeply shadowed hat, seemed to resemble not just an object but an expression itself. Oh, that shop has its canopy hanging so low. The area above the canopy was also pitch dark. Because the surroundings were so dark, the few electric lights in front of the shop shone brightly, like a sudden rainstorm, creating a splendid view that was not overshadowed by anything. Standing on the street, the naked light bulbs seemed to pierce my eyes, while I gazed at the view of the fruit shop through the glass windows of the nearby locksmith's second floor. The scene before me, with the bright lights and the fruits, was the most thrilling thing I had seen in Teramachi in a long time. That day, I bought something from the shop more than usual. This was because they had a rare lemon on display. Lemons were generally very common, but the shop, though not shabby, was an ordinary greengrocer's, and I hadn't seen such a lemon there before. I really liked that lemon. The simple color, like lemon yellow squeezed from a tube of paint, and the compact, spindle-like shape. In the end, I decided to buy just one. Afterward, I walked through the streets. It seemed that the ominous lump that had been pressing on my heart loosened the moment I held the lemon, and I felt remarkably happy walking through the streets. The persistent gloom I had been carrying was momentarily distracted by something as simple as a single lemon. Perhaps, in an ironic twist, this was the truth. Still, how strange the human heart is. The coolness of the lemon was indescribably pleasant. At that time, I was suffering from pulmonary tuberculosis, and I always had a fever. In fact, I used to show my friends the heat in my hands, holding them out to compare, and my palms were always hotter than anyone else's. Perhaps because of this heat, the coldness of the lemon seemed to seep through my skin, and it felt wonderfully refreshing. I brought the fruit to my nose over and over again, sniffing it each time. The place it came from, California, came to mind. The words to strike the nose from the classical Chinese text "The Seller of Oranges" appeared in fragments in my thoughts. Then, as I deeply inhaled the fragrant air, the warmth of blood surged up through my body and face, something I had never experienced before, and it felt as if my inner vitality was awakening. In fact, I found it so fitting that I almost wanted to say that these simple sensations, coolness, touch, smell, and sight, were exactly what I had been searching for all along. It was quite a mysterious feeling, considering this was a time long ago. I walked through the streets, my excitement light and buoyant, feeling a sense of pride, as though I were dressed in artistic attire, like a poet strolling about, thinking of such figures. I placed the lemon on a dirty handkerchief, then on my cloak, measuring how the color reflected. I thought to myself. In other words, this is the weight. That weight was exactly what I had always been searching for, and without a doubt, it was the weight that converted all good and beautiful things into something tangible. Perhaps, in my self-important jesting spirit, I even entertained the silly thought that this weight was some kind of universal measure for beauty and goodness. Regardless, I realized that I was happy. I'm not sure where exactly I walked, but the last place I stood was in front of Maruzen. Normally, I avoided Maruzen, but at that moment, it seemed as if I could easily enter. Today, I'll go in, I thought, and without hesitation, I walked inside. But what was happening? The happy feeling that had filled my heart slowly began to fade away. The perfume bottles and the smoking pipes no longer weighed on my heart. A sense of melancholy began to creep in, and I thought that perhaps it was just the fatigue from walking around. I went to the bookshelf with the art books. Even pulling out the heavy art books felt increasingly difficult. Still, I pulled them out one by one, opening them, but the eagerness to immerse myself in them didn't return. And cursedly, I pulled out the next one. It was the same. Yet, I couldn't stop myself from pulling out more. After a while, I could no longer bear it and left the books there, unable to return them to their original places. I repeated this process several times. Eventually, I even set aside the heavy orange book by Angra, one I had loved for so long, unable to bear it any longer. What a cursed thing! The fatigue in my hand muscles lingered. I felt miserable, staring at the pile of books I had pulled out and stacked. What had happened to the art books that once so fascinated me? After flipping through each page, when I looked around at the ordinary surroundings, I felt that strange dissonance I had once enjoyed so much. Ah, yes, that's it, I suddenly remembered the lemon in my sleeve. I thought to myself that if I piled up the colors of the books and then tried it with the lemon. Yes, that's it. The light excitement from before returned to me. I grabbed the books haphazardly, quickly crushing them, then hurriedly stacking them again. I pulled out new ones, added them, and took others away. The strange, fantastical castle I had built turned red, then blue, each time. At last, it was done. Holding back my light, jubilant heart, I carefully placed the lemon atop the castle wall. And it was perfect. Looking around, the color of the lemon quietly absorbed the chaotic hues into its spindle-shaped body, and it gleamed brightly. I felt that the dusty air inside Maruzen was strangely tense around the lemon. I stared at it for a while. Suddenly, a second idea came to me. That strange scheme almost startled me. I'll leave it like that and walk out, pretending nothing is amiss. I felt a strange tickling sensation. Should I leave? Yes, I'll leave. And I walked out briskly. That strange tickling sensation made me smile as I walked through the streets. The bizarre villain who had planted the terrifying golden bomb on the Maruzen shelf was me, and how amusing it would be if, in just a few moments, Maruzen exploded in a magnificent blast, centered around the art books. I eagerly pursued this thought. Then that stuffy Maruzen would be reduced to dust. And so, I walked down the Kyogoku street, where the movie posters painted the streets with their peculiar charm,